The Healthy Community part of our show is about our Health and Human Services Department, which makes sense.
And there is a whole lot more to that department than a lot of us realize.
It is one of our largest county departments.
And they do an incredible job of helping a lot of amazing people.
We hope you learned something new now in our Healthy Community story.
Jackson County recently held a workshop on the integration of non-lethal predation tools and methods into county wolf management strategies. For those of you who couldn't make it, here's an overview, or watch the entire workshop at jacksoncounty.org.
The purpose of this workshop, it's an educational workshop, and that's what, and we're focused on what the role of non-lethal methods in predation management with a focus on wolves. Now, I know as soon as I mention wolves, that there's a lot of opinions, a lot of strong feelings either way about wolves, and I just want to direct people to say that we're not here to discuss whether wolves belong on the landscape. This is a workshop on dealing with the realities of wolves on the landscape, because that decision of whether wolves are going to be on the landscape, that's already been made by the state of Oregon, and it's already played out and continues to play out as far as how they should be managed and what have you. But non-lethal is certainly a component of the state's plan to manage wolves, and that's what we're going to focus on today.
Back in 1980, the only place where wolves occurred in the lower 48 was in northern Minnesota and in Isle Royale and in Lake Superior. There has always been a lot of wolves up in northern Canada and Alaska, but in the lower 48, although they had been throughout most of the country historically, the only place they occurred is in Minnesota, and so they were listed, actually when the Endangered Species Act came into being in the 1970s, they were listed as endangered species, and recovery efforts were launched to try to bring them back to some of their former range. What I'll primarily be talking about here is the Northern Rocky Mountains population, because that's what that recovery and growth of that population is why we have wolves in Oregon today. In 1995, they released 15 into central Idaho and 14 into Yellowstone National Park. They did another release in the winter of 1996. This was the only release of wolves that occurred. Everything we're seeing now is a result of the growth of this population, and also the growth in northwest Montana. Wolves had already migrated down from Canada, so they weren't reintroduced into northern Montana, but that population has grown too. Populations can grow very rapidly. The Northern Rocky Mountains population, it was 152 wolves in 96. In 12 years, it became 1,645. So the population can grow fast. Information on the diet of wolves, primarily elk and deer, both in the winter and the summer. So that's their primary prey. Attacks on livestock, not all packs depredate. On average, the study that was done in the Northern Rockies found that in any given year, about 22% of the packs depredate, so not a super high percentage. Large pack size increases depredation risk. This graph here is circled with a red line. You can see preventative measures can be effective, which of course is the focus of this workshop, and you'll be hearing a lot more about. Some of the things that have really, I think we feel have helped here in Oregon is cleaning up old bone piles and carcasses, keeping ranchers updated on the locations of collared wolves, range riders, flattery fencing. You can do hazing with cracker shells.
We do use a science-based approach. So a lot of the research we do, you may see as kind of like, well, why are you doing that when what you're really trying to do, what I want to know is how to not have my cattle or sheep get killed. Well, a lot of times what we need to know is what's going on in the background with the predators. And so we do everything from interactions, whether that's with people, livestock, or prey, or native prey. We also look at things like behavior and physiology of the animals, and that helps a lot with designing tools too. Or even things like, more laboratory, like physiology and genetics. But basically, there's some, the key points to reducing depredation is having the available tools and using them at the right time and at the right location. And one of the examples I think Stuart will probably talk about in more detail, but a lot of times we're using these things in combination. We're not just throwing guard dogs out there without a shepherd, maybe. Or maybe we're using fladry to do some night pinning, and then during the day, the sheep or cattle are out with the guard dogs presence around them, or maybe both overnight. So, you can combine these tools in ways to make them a little bit more effective if you're in an area with really high depredation. And then the last point I want to really make is this human behavior element. And I think a key thing is working together to problem solve.
And I think the take-home message is really something that Julie said, which is we all have a stake here in what we're talking about. And that it takes that kind of group effort and that group level thinking to really, in my mind, make strides towards better coexistence. And so when we talk about options for predator management, and I know the emphasis is on non-lethal tools, and that's where most of my work has occurred. But what I've learned is, we just can't focus on non-lethals with the exclusion of lethal tools. And what we typically do, and the way wildlife services works, and obviously, or arguably a lot of agencies work, is that we kind of have this sort of reactive mindset. So we wait till a producer calls, and we go out and we work on the problem. And a lot of times we're doing that for both lethal and non-lethal sort of solutions. So you get a call up, like, I've got a wolf in my cows, and what can we do about it? Well, for lethal control actions, having this sort of reactive mindset is probably okay. It's probably a valid way to utilize lethal tools. From a non-lethal perspective, if we're reacting to situations, we're too late to the dance. We got to be preventative. So that's one of the things I want you to think about and take home, is the importance of preventative work with these non-lethal tools.
So talking about the tools then that I've been most involved with, the first one is range riding. And so what is range riding? I think that there are probably as many different definitions of range riding as there are range riders, but basically they are shepherds for cattle. They're folks who are hired to spend a lot of time keeping a close eye on herds of cattle and taking active steps to really do what they can to reduce the risk of predation. It's really important to understand that range riding shouldn't be this idea of someone sitting on horseback and sort of sitting around waiting for things to happen to react to, but instead that the best thing a range rider can do is really be proactive and really be out there doing things and taking steps to affirmatively reduce the risk of predation. So the next tool I thought I'd spend just a couple minutes on is permanent electric fencing. Everything from chicken coops, protecting fruit trees, livestock feed, compost piles, garbage bins, calving pastures, livestock pens, outhouses, gardens, cabins, apiaries, and more. I'd like to spend now a little bit of time talking more about fladry. So it says fladry is a tool used to protect livestock from predators such as wolves and coyotes. It is made of a line with brightly colored flags hung at regular intervals. For extra protection, the line carrying the flags can be electrified. This is called turbofladry. Because wolves are afraid of new things in their environment, like fluttering flags, they're cautious about crossing the fladry.
Today we installed a product called turbofladry. The purpose is to try and help to keep wolves out of this pasture right here where we've got some cattle that are experiencing depredations. It's an electrified polywire, has plastic flags that hang off the wire. It seems to work in smaller pastures and over shorter time periods.
This is my last slide just to show your basic fladry toolbox and essentially what you need to build your fladry. And also just to mention that if at all possible, four-wheelers sure make life a lot better.
So I'll just kind of do a brief background. The grant got started back in 2011 when Governor Kitzhaber signed the bill. Our first grant year was 2012. And the structure of this was kind of unique. It really was created to be a county pass-through grant, block grant. And we wanted the county wolf advisory committees to have the bulk of the authority and administrative function of these programs. Right now, we have 15 counties that have county wolf programs.